This topic is about conventions. And the reason why this is important is because if you just show up to a convention as a participant, you're probably going to be victimized by everything that has been decided before you got there. And so by going over the rules of conventions, it shows you where the levers of power is and where you can intersect with what's going on so that you're not actually victimized by the time you get there. Usually, many people go to conventions and it's their first time and they don't know what's going on. And so the whole experience is very, very new to them. If you understand how they're constructed, at least helps you get your bearings on when to show up and what to do when you get there. So going to the first slide, the definition of a convention is an assembly of delegates who are chosen specifically for each session as representatives of the constituent units within a larger group of people to sit in a single deliberative body acting in the name of the entire group. I think I got some of the English wrong there, but it's an assembly of delegates and you're chosen to do something specific by another organization.
Rules stuff that you're quoting here?
Yes.
The actual, okay, it comes out of that directly, okay.
Yeah. Going to the next slide, some examples of conventions. Here in Oregon, we have both county and state platform conventions. Some of the larger counties like Multnomah and Washington County have their own platform convention in addition to the states. We have the state delegate selection conventions where we pick our delegates from Oregon to go to the Democratic National Convention. We have the Democratic National Convention itself, which is like the mother of all conventions because they're usually 3 years in the planning. Locally, for those of you who are aspiring parliamentarians, we have the Oregon Association of Parliamentarians Annual Convention coming up in March of 2019, and they're preparing for that right now. And then we'll have the National Association of Parliamentarians Biennial Convention coming up next year in Las Vegas.
You should just become a parliamentarian, everybody, to go to the Vegas convention. I mean, how fun will that be? Right.
I'm dying to find out.
I know you are, and you're going to go, aren't you? You're going to go.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
So when you think about conventions, you might think, like dental hygienist conventions and things like that. Conventions are actually can be very exciting. I remember watching conventions when I was a kid on television, the Democratic National Convention with floor votes and people marching around and with their signs and doing protests, and of course all the sleazy backroom deals and stuff. That was how they used to be. They used to be a little bit more dynamic. With the convention coming up this year with no clear front runner, it might be a brokered convention as well. So that is why it's so important for the Democrats and certainly the progressive Democrats to understand how all this stuff is put together so they don't get screwed out of things by the establishment.
I agree, and I agree with you on conventions. They used to be, even the recent one, which was chaotic, was powerful because you just see so many people together. It's a unity. It's unifying. It's a show of solidarity, and you're right. They have changed a little bit. Hi, Real and Brom. Nice to have you here. And if you guys have any questions, I'll be in chat to take them. Carry on, Larry.
And most of you probably watched it anyway, but this is a screenshot from the 2012 convention. Very high production values, which, as we know, doesn't always lead to success at the polls, but great show anyway.
Nice, yes.
So in the bylaws provisions for conventions should be the following, and this is, as John asked us, directly out of Robert's Rules of Order. So going back to the concept of all the power belonging to the assembly and then doled out. So this is one of those places where they dole out responsibility. They authorize the creation of a convention and the way in which it has come about. So in the bylaws should be an authorization for periodic conventions, define the powers and duties of the convention. This is how you allocate power from the assembly to another group. You fix the quorum of the convention. So this is the number of people needed to show up to transact business. Specify the voting members of the convention, like who can vote, and then prescribe qualifications of the delegates and alternates basis of determining their number, and the method of electing them. All of this should be very clear. If you were watching the show earlier today, you saw we talked about the neighborhood association that seemed to be indistinct about who a member was. If you document how a member comes about, so it's very clear to all parties, then you do not have contention, as we saw in the 2016 November Nevada delegate selection convention.
One of my favorites.
Always. We're not going to drag out that one again. Everyone can Google hours of footage on that convention if they want to see something gone wrong.
Well, sure, but I think it actually points to the fact that when you talk about conventions, more people know about Democratic conventions because of that one. So, you know what I mean? We're much more aware of what goes on these days.
There's no bad press.
No.
Convention members. So this is the next slide. Membership generally comes about in one of the following ways. It's either elected by a constituent body. So in the delegate selection conventions in Oregon, usually the delegates come from the counties through a provision of the bylaws. So there might be something for registering and some qualifications for becoming a member. Through being an incumbent officer, often officers are automatic delegates to things. Through being an accredited elected alternate and replacing a delegate unable to attend. This is an area where we need to do some work, is how alternate delegates take the place of delegates in conventions. Going to the next slide, the Robert's Rules actually talks about provision for alternates. So to ensure as complete representation as possible, the bylaws of the convention should provide that each unit shall elect a certain number of alternate delegates, and alternates are normally elected with a designated order in which they will be called to serve. And you really want this because if you don't have a completely ethical chair who, if it's their responsibility for making sure alternate delegates take the position of open slots, you don't want them picking and choosing amongst his favorites. You want a predetermined order based on what has been elected by the assembly of who's going. What's interesting about credentialing is that we have a credentialing process for the State Central Committee in Oregon. In Robert's Rules, they only talk about credentialing in association with conventions, but all that body of knowledge is directly transferable if you need it somewhere else. And you only need it if you have a problem with uncredentialed people showing up and skewing the votes. Here's just a note on status and seating. So this is one of the things that was violated actually during the last Democratic Party of Oregon reorganization. We had a delegate who was there for just the vote of the chair, and they decided to skip the votes for the vice chairs and secretary. And so allegedly this person just handed off his credentials to someone else and said, "Here, you take my place. I'm going to go do something else." That is not how it's done. So here is the proper way on status and seating of alternates. If an alternate is to replace a delegate who is registered, proper evidence of that delegate's withdrawal from such a status must be presented to the Credentials Committee, and the alternate must be re-registered as a delegate. It is the delegate's responsibility to notify the Credentials Committee. So what this delegate should have done is said, "Hey, I got to go, something else to do today." Marched over to the credentials table and turned in his credentials so that they have a record of that person withdrawing from the convention. And then it should be the Credentials Committee who has the list of alternate delegates and the next one to be selected. And then it's their responsibility to go out and appoint that, find that person and then transfer them from being an alternate delegate into a delegate. This is how you retain integrity in your voting process.
So what happens if the alternate that is not available? Or are they supposed to just be hanging around?
Yeah, they're supposed to be hanging around. Hopefully you have rules about this stuff. you would ordinarily expect people to stay for the whole event. There's no reason why someone should bug out after only a quarter of the voting is done. If they want to be that blasé about things, they really shouldn't have gone in the first place. We do need to beef up the rules around the seating of alternates so that we don't have that kind of stuff going on. In the committees, like in the Rules Committee, we allow the alternate delegates to engage in the debate, which I think is kind of cool, because then if they should ever step into the role of a delegate, they're up to speed on all of the previous discussion, and they don't have to start over from scratch, and they can be contributing to the discussion. Yeah, if you're number one or number two in a delegation, especially from Multnomah County that has 20 delegates to send, first of all, there's a delegation chair who verifies that the delegates are attending, and makes arrangements for the alternates to attend if they don't have a full delegation of delegates going. And then you should have one or two going anyway, just because with as many as 20 delegates attending, odds are one or two of them are not going to actually make it that day just because life intercedes.
That's all right. Well,
it makes those first and second alternate delegates always on the edge.
Yes, I can see how that would be. We're going to take a quick left turn to the prior Robert's Rules, because Tracy Carlos has posted a great question that for some reason I can't show through the live stream graphic here. It's just not working for me right now. Her question, though, is I have a question about the last video topic, boards. What recourse does the General Assembly have when the executive board does something blatantly outside their power in a month between meetings?
You have to wait till the next regular meeting, which is awkward. Sometimes you can, there's provisions for calling a special meeting to deal with situations like that. What you have to do is bring this up as a point of order, and you would say, point of order, it's come to my attention that the executive board spent $20,000 on trips to Hawaii, which is clearly outside what the budget was intended for.
Yes.
And then the chair will stand up and say, oh, but we have the authority to do that in between meetings. And then that's when you use the appeal process. Then you say, I appeal the ruling of the chair. And then the question goes to the assembly on whether or not that was appropriate action to take. And you can move that it be reversed. If you've got a board that evil, why are they in place anyway? You should go to the section on recalling officers.
So you need at least a couple people to be able to do this, because you need one to make the motion and then somebody to second, right? Who's in with it together. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, you do need a second on appeal, I believe.
Okay.
And then you need a majority to stand behind you. So you'll have to clearly state your case, and in a way that they can understand. And if you're really good at preparing for these meetings, you've already lined up your votes before you get there.
Right. I think that's what I was really trying to say, Tracy, is that if that happened, you should contact everybody but the executive board and try to say, we need to get together and be on this together at the next meeting, so that you can overpower. Yeah. Then now back to this Robert's Rules. So, thank you. That's a good question.
On the next slide, this goes over the convention organization, and this gets to where the levers of power are. What you find typically are three committees that's been established to do the convention. There's the Credentials Committee, the Committee on Standing Rules, and the Program Committee. And if at all possible, you should get your people on these committees so that you have a say in how some of this stuff is organized. Other committees that you could have are the Arrangements Committee, which for larger conventions ends up being a big deal. Like the Democratic National Convention has to select a city in which to host it that has thousands and thousands of hotel rooms and all that kind of stuff. So the Arrangements Committees can become quite elaborate. And then there's a resolutions committee, which helps people transfer their concepts into clear and meaningful English so that everyone can agree to what's being voted on. The thing about a convention is that they have to be formally recognized. I'm trying to get onto my slide. If you've ever been to a convention, there's always that really boring first session that everyone tries to skip. But there actually is a formal organization procedure. So before a convention can transact any business, it must officially form itself into a single voting body, which is done at the first business meeting. And this allows the convention to act in the name of the whole society. And so we're going to go through what that actually means now. So on the slide called Formal Organization Procedure Continued, the official organization is brought about by the separate consideration and adoption of the reports of these three committees, that being the program, credentials, and rules. Each report is adopted. However, and this is important to remember, each report is debatable and amendable, and a majority is required for credentials and the program reports, and 2/3 is required for standing rules. And the reason why it's 2/3 for standing rules is because there's always something in the standing rules that limits your rights to participate, and that requires 2/3, so they make the whole thing 2/3. The important thing in here, though, is that each report is debatable and amendable. So even though you've had someone come up and present the rules committee, you can move to change them. You don't have to take what is given to you. Just as the agenda is a proposed agenda, these are proposed rules for the convention. Unfortunately, you don't get the rules until you've registered as a member, and if you do not do registration until the day of the convention, you do not have a lot of time to analyze and go through and see if there's been things put in there that limit your rights to too great of an extent. They might do things like say every member can speak only once and for 35 seconds or 45 seconds. You might think this is too limiting because it's hard to condense an argument to that, and you might want to be able to speak twice in case something else comes up under the same discussion. So that is something that you should watch out for. Probably skim it and look for anything where your rights are being limited and make sure that you're in agreement with that. Otherwise, you should move to change those rules, because even though they are printed in the program, they are not cast in stone. You can modify them. Also, the credentials report is debatable and amendable, and you can move to reject delegates. And if a majority of the membership agrees, you can do this. And perhaps you know of a delegation that was not properly elected from a county, and they're actually people from a different party who are trying to move in and disrupt the proceedings. If you can question people's credentials and move that they be not credentialed or have their credentials taken away. So just remember, each report is debatable and amendable. Get a copy of the rules as soon as you can and go over them and make sure you're in agreement with the rules that are being proposed.
Just real quick, the show you did earlier today, Progressive Oregon, talking about power to the people, we talked about some of these committees and how you get on them and how important they are, being involved in your county level party. So, and now we're seeing where they wield that power. Right?
Yep. On the next slide then is how conventions come about. With the adoption of these three separate reports, the convention is officially recognized for conducting business. The next slide is kind of funny because this is verbatim from Robert's Rules. Cases of contested seats in a delegation will seldom arise except in political conventions.
That's
At
true.
that dental hygienist convention, you rarely get contested seats.
No, really?
But our former chair of the Rose City unit of the parliamentarians, and he was also former chair of the Oregon Association of Parliamentarians, is a member of the Libertarian Party, and they have had instances where the separate delegations from Oregon have been sent to the convention, and the seating of the delegation was contested, and huge drama over that. So this stuff really does happen. Credential committee's duties. What's interesting is that they really don't talk about doing credentialing for regular meetings, but this information is transferable because the processes are essentially the same. We have counties that do credentialing for their own meetings, and we have the State Central Committee that does credentialing, and we have a credentials committee that carries out this stuff, even though these are for regular meetings of the Assembly and not conventions. All of these responsibilities and duties are transferable and really should be the responsibility of the Credentials Committee. So these are the 6 things that the Credentials Committee should do. They should distribute in advance the authorized number of attendees. They should collect registration material. So as people do whatever they do, like submit $50 or a form or whatever it takes to register, they collect that material so that they can do the next step, which is compile the list of members entitled to register and attend. They make arrangements for registration, and the registration is when you show up at the convention beforehand, before the convention starts, and get your credentials and your materials to use in the convention itself. The registration process itself, which has to be open for the complete duration of the convention, because once you are a member, you have a right to attend any portion of it, and corollary to that is skip any part of it that you might want to. And then preparation of the committee's first report, which is where they demonstrate that a quorum has been achieved and you can then transact business. The Committee on Standing Rules drafts and submits for consideration a group of rules known as the proposed standing rules of the convention. And as I said earlier, a copy of these rules should be handed out to each person when they register. It requires a 2/3 vote for acceptance. And if you're familiar with the lingo about adopting or amending motions, seriatim consideration is not applicable. And what this means is that someone can't say, I move that we consider these 600 rules in seriam, which means we go through and agree to each one of them. Can't do that. What you can do is identify a particular rule that you would like to amend.
So the same thing applies. You can make amendments on the fly. You just can't go pick at it one at a time. All right.
You can't force all of them being done one at a time. You can still sit there and move that all 600 individually are considered if you have an issue with all 600 of them. But you just can't say, we're going to do this in seriatim because you want to be a jerk and bog down the convention. You have to have a reason for contesting each and every one that you want to consider. That's what that's about.
Very cool. Thank you.
The program committee plans and submits the proposed schedule of meetings, proceedings, and special events of the convention. Again, this takes an enormous amount of work to organize, and so unless someone has arranged for David Duke to come in and address the assembly or something that you really, really, really object to, there's really not a lot of room to change the program, because arrangements have been made for meetings, and these are very complex things to schedule, and they're very difficult to change. So you only want to do that if there's something egregious that has been scheduled. One of the things that you might watch out for is not enough time being allocated for the meetings of certain groups. That's kind of a way of limiting the effect of what groups can do is not giving enough time. As we know from Robert's Rules of Order, you do not have to accept time frames like that. If the majority wants to extend the time to meet, they can do so. It's a little dicey when the rooms have been scheduled and you're being told that you have nowhere to meet, but that still does not prevent you from meeting. The first meeting and convention officer elections. Be sure to attend the first meeting where the officers are elected and the reports are adopted. And the reports being the three reports that we've talked about. The platform convention typically goes over 3 days, the first one starting on Friday night. And if it's held in a place that's not nearby, it usually means that you have to spend an extra night there to attend the Friday meeting, which pretty much doubles the cost of a weekend if you have to rent a motel room or whatever it takes to attend. But you do need to, if at all possible, attend the first meeting and make sure that you're in agreement with the reports that are being presented, and that you are also in agreement with the officers. So part of the rules are going to be electing a temporary chair and then electing the permanent chair and all of that sort of rigmarole. And usually these are pro forma actions. The chairs have been chosen in advance because they understand what's going on and they've been trained and they can do the job. However, you might object to who's been selected. They might pick the most sordid establishment person imaginable to do this, and if that's not acceptable to the majority, you can have your own slate of candidates that you can elect in. It just requires preparation and organization and to be successful to do that kind of thing, unless it's so egregious that you've ignited the entire majority of the convention floor into action. If you don't make changes on the first day, you can make changes later, but it's very, very difficult to intercede, as we saw in Nevada.
Yeah, well, got to stop those from happening.
So that's pretty much it. All I had on conventions. Really, the key points are, where all the decisions are made, and how to change them if they're not in agreement with you, instead of just sitting there like sheeple and taking what's been planned for you. Is there any questions from the line on this?
No questions. I think you did a great job covering all that. Brom just wanted to mention that he's looking forward to Thursday's We the People. So am I. So we have Jill Stein coming on, and we're not going to talk about Russia. Should be a first for Jill. And Dewey Bueno mentioned Tim Canova putting some tire tracks over the debate dodger Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Obviously not implying violence at all. Just saying we need Tim to win. So, people are thinking about what's coming up with the elections. You guys, this stuff that we're talking about here is how you prevent rigged conventions and rigged BS. So please share with your groups. But no questions. Thanks, Larry. It's good stuff.
Thank you, John.
We're on to the out here.
Yes.
And I should say, if you guys have any questions before we, proceed with the out, let me know. Hit me up in chat. I'm here. Onward, Larry. You want to get into your organizational stuff?
Oh, yes. If you would like to study this material, regardless of where you live, you can join the Cascadia e-unit. This is a group that is being organized within the National Association of Parliamentarians, and it is also associated with the Oregon Association of Parliamentarians. And the intention is to provide a way to study all of this material for those of us who do not live in the Portland metro area. There are several ways you can join. You can be a provisional member. If you would like to become a member of the National Association of Parliamentarians, there's a admissions quiz you can take. We just had someone pass that last week, which is really cool. And the thing that you get, which is subtle but certainly tangible, is by talking about these issues with people who are experienced in parliamentary procedure, you can understand better the underlying concepts of democracy. People who think that they can get all this stuff just by reading a book and sitting in their attic or basement um, might miss some fundamental concepts. It's not like the Bible where you can pick and choose to justify, whatever your beliefs are. There's actually some underlying principles. Not to say there aren't underlying principles in the Bible, but there are underlying principles of democracy in parliamentary procedure that you need to get in order to effectively utilize this stuff. If you would like to join, you can contact me and I can make arrangements for you to take the exams. If you want to be a provisional member, all you need to do is pay $5 to the Cascadia E-Unit. We will put you on the meeting list and get you involved in the meetings. We have a curriculum that'll run between now and the end of the year, and then starting up in January, we'll start a new curriculum. And we would love to have everyone join us. The reference materials that you need for this stuff is Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised 11th edition, which is going to be good until 2020. So previously I said that the 12th edition was coming out. Turns out it's still a ways off. So your 11th edition is good for the foreseeable future. To pass the admissions exam, in theory, all you need to do is comprehend the concepts inside of Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised. In brief, which is the yellow book, 80% of the things you'll ever encounter are covered in this book, and that'll get you on your way. That's it, John. We are ready for our closing song.
That's awesome. We blazed through that. Half-hour Robert's Rules. Makes up for last week's show, which ran a little long there. But good information. And thank you to whoever watches these and makes time marks in the comments, because that's helpful, I think, for everybody. Appreciate that. Yes, Dewey, you need this info. You need to study. Appreciate that. Brom dropped a link to Tim Canova on Kelly Lane's channel. They did a show just because we're rooting for Tim there. Everybody appreciates the information. Thank you so much, Larry. Is this it? What's the next one? We have one more?
I believe the next one is on mass meetings.
Yes, it is.
And that is when you want to get people together to do something when you don't have an organized society. So like anti-war protests, deciding if you want a mass of people to organize against a convention or something like that. It's how to organize those things and do it using best known methods of organization.
Awesome. Robert's Rules comes in handy for other things, everybody. Yeah, all right. So just real quick, I'm going to plug this. We do have on Thursday, We the People with Dr. Jill Stein. She was a 2016 Green Party presidential nominee. She wants to address things heading into California. The Green Party actually has a bunch of people running for offices that are lower level offices, and I think that's fantastic because that's really what we need to take on, right? Running for governor is cool, but your option or your chances are minimal when you're dealing with, big guns. Running for county commissioner, school board, those are the roles that I see a lot of Green Party candidates taking on coming up here, and I think that's phenomenal. And so we'll be talking to her about that. We'll be talking about everything the Green Party wants to talk about except Russia, just to give her a break on that. So please join us for that on Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific. And right here on this channel, we're going to get out of here with, does anybody know the Dispatch, know the band? Anybody local to, I think they're local to Oregon or Portland. I may be just totally off on that. But we can play all their music. It seems very politically motivated and charged, and I like it. And so we're going to go out here with a Dispatch song I heard on Slacker called The General. And I'm going to try to reach out to these guys. If anybody can give any, let me know if you have any connections with them, that would be great. But it'd be nice to do a kind of a rally for the progressive movement with bands like Dispatch. So here we go. I'm just going to let you look at the cover here. We go out. Thanks, everybody. See you Thursday.
There was a decorated general with a heart of gold that likened him to all the stories he told of past battles won and lost and legends of old. A seasoned veteran in his own time, on the battlefield he gained respectful fame, with many medals of bravery and stripes to his name. He grew a beard as soon as he could to cover the scars on his face, and always urged his men on. But on the eve of a great battle with the infantry and dream, the old general tossed in his sleep and wrestled with its meaning. He awoke from the night to tell what he had seen, and walked slowly out of his tent. All the men held tall with their chests in the air, with the courage in their blood and a fire in their stare. And it was a great morning and they all wondered how they would fare, till the old general told them to go home. He said, I have seen the others, and I have discovered that this fight is not worth fighting. And I've seen their mothers, and I will know other to follow me where I'm going. So take a shower and shine your shoes. You got no time to lose. If you are young, then you must be living. Take a shower and shine your shoes. You got no time to lose. If you are young, then you must be living. Go now, you are forgiven. But the men stood fast with their guns on their shoulders, not knowing what to do with the contradicting orders. The general said he would do his own duty, but he would extend it no further. The men could go as they pleased, but not a man moved. Their eyes gazed straight ahead, till one by one they stepped back and not a word was said. And the old general was left with his own words echoing in his head. He then prepared to fight. He said, I have seen the others, and I have discovered that this fight is not worth fighting. No, and I've seen their mothers, and I will know other to follow me where I'm going. So take a shower and shine your shoes. Oh, you got no time to lose. You are young, then you must be living. Yeah. Take a shower and shine your shoes. Oh, you got no time to lose. You are young, then you must be living. Go now, you are forgiven. 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 Go. Yeah. Go now, you are forgiven. Go now, you are forgiven. Go now, you are forgiven. Go. Oh.